are sick and tired of establishment politics, and they want real change.
Welcome to New Libs on the Block. I am Andy Smith.
I'm Brion Curran.
I'm Kristi Pursell.
Welcome to the Resistance, everybody. We're getting off to a rocky start. This is the third or fourth time we've tried to start this, and I have messed up every time. I will take the blame for this, but this is Trump's America, and now we're living in it. Darkest timelines. Kristi, Brion, how are you all doing?
This laughter was good medicine.
Yeah, it was.
Laughing at Andy.
Yeah, I did it on purpose. That's what I was thinking the whole time.
Yeah, 3 takes for an intro. Love it. Thanks for the laugh.
I messed up the name of our podcast. I forgot to say the podcast, and that time I messed up, I think, my name. Smith. It's like the easiest name to say. Mm-hmm. I'm doing great, so I'm going to sip this coffee while I ask Brion, did you watch the inauguration on Monday, January 21st?
I don't know if my opinion on this is controversial or not. I did not watch it.
I did not watch it either. Don't ask me.
Okay.
Hey, you're
great.
with AOC, who I think said, I don't celebrate rapist, I think is what she said, or sexual assaulters.
That too.
So, strong point. I did watch it, not because I support, obviously, that, but I wanted to I wanted to see what it was like, what this man was going to say, what the inauguration speech was going to look like.
I know that Melania wore a hat.
She did wear...
that's what I know.
A large hat, which seems to be her thing. First off, terrifying. I am a lover of history, and that space in the Capitol Rotunda, I blue skied this during the actual ceremony, but it houses a really famous John Trumbull painting. John Trumbull painted a lot of the Revolutionary War scenes that we know, like the signing of Declaration or whatever. One of his lesser-known ones that hangs in the rotunda that I think is really important is Washington at Annapolis. This is when Washington, at the end of the Revolution, when he wins, he resigns his commission, which is like this massive moment in American history, because in every other revolution against a parent state or over sort of an establishment, whether it's the Glorious Revolution in England or in Imperial Rome, the leader of the army eventually just becomes the new aristocracy, the new king. Oliver Cromwell becomes basically king. Julius Caesar becomes emperor. But George Washington chose not to. He put down that ultimate power that he could have had. And I blue skied really as this is happening. It's just like now, roughly, 230 years later, another American is basically just trying to pick that back up and become his own version of whatever an American king or emperor would look like. And it was truly terrifying.
I avoided watching the event itself just because, we knew what was coming. We knew the messaging has been consistent all along, right? Project 2025, it's all been laid out. I didn't see a reason to sort of witness all of that unfold. I don't recommend that folks subject themselves to watching Donald Trump's speeches unless absolutely necessary, and rely on folks to give you the information afterwards to process and dig through, because listening to some of those messages is just so harmful, tragic in some cases. And, that's why I chose not to watch it and just to rely on documentation after the fact.
And I got to go on a tour of the Indian Health Board in Minneapolis yesterday as a hopeful member of the House Health Committee. Stopped and saw very dear friends with my kids, and we just drank some hot cocoa and got to be in community together. And then last night was a community celebration of a local leader who happens to be an immigrant, and she's been working on driver's licenses for all and other really important quality of life improvements for her community here in Northfield. And she was honored at the Martin Luther King Jr. Day celebration that's hosted by our Human Rights Commission. And we had a keynote speaker of a Minneapolis City Councilwoman who I didn't realize was a Carleton College graduate. And that is how I chose to spend the day, which was amongst community and family and friends, celebrating what I think real leadership looks like. I think we all agree it's much more like the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and not Donald.
What an intense contrast that provided.
Yeah, the juxtaposition between celebrating such a wonderful leader, such a powerful leader in these spaces, with the administration coming in that just has such opposite values and opposite messaging. I too, Kristi, yesterday was at a community event for Martin Luther King Jr. Day, and as at a church just down the road from where I live, and the sense of community there on a day that could be so sad. We were really able to focus on all of the good work that people have done and continue to do, and talk about our values in a space among people who really just want the best for each other. And it was really comforting and timely to hold that space with each other and sort of disengage a little bit with what's happening on the federal level.
So I took some notes. I did, give myself over to watching that speech. And I think as just what Brion said of wanting to talk about these things after the fact, I'm completely supportive of people who don't want to do that. I'm glad you didn't. But I do think in this space is a good place to talk about this and the impact on people and how we should move forward in truly resisting an authoritarian grab for power. And so I have a list here of Trump's executive orders on day one that he has signed or intends to sign at the time of our recording. We're recording this on the 21st. So if you guys are all right, I think we'll just start off going down these lists, and I want to get maybe some just initial thoughts. There's going to be a lot of time during the Trump presidency to have to talk, unfortunately, about these terrible things and how we respond. So none of this is meant to be completely informative because we don't know how exactly these things are going to work themselves out. But just some things that Trump has told us who he is, and now there's like actions of what he is going to do. So the first one, and he talked about this a lot in his inauguration speech, which is declaring a national emergency at our southern border. He talked about this a lot in his political rallies, and now saying it from his position as the 47th president of the United States. Some specific things that does, that he has the authority to do because he has declared that national emergency. He now is treating cartels as terrorist organizations in the government apparatus. He has suspended basically all refugee programs. In fact, there are reports that people had like appointments for 1:00 yesterday that were canceled at 12:01, 12:05 once Trump became president. And that's not just things at southern border. That's like refugee programs for Afghan refugees or other around the world. Some in Latin America are suspended. I mean, I know your guys' thoughts on that, but what are your reactions to this order?
I just think it's so un-American. I mean, we're a nation of immigrants, and we have, these beautiful words etched on the Statue of Liberty. It doesn't say, bring me your tech billionaires and the good immigrants. It says that all people are welcome here, and that's clearly no longer the case. So coming from our federal government, and that is absolutely heartbreaking because I don't know about y'all, but I'm not a person native to this land. My people were immigrants here and didn't pass some kind of test or didn't, what we are asking of people who are already in such a difficult position and what they've chosen to do to upend their entire lives and their families and their well-being because they have the need for a better life. And this is so dehumanizing, and it just seems so un-American. It's heartbreaking.
Yeah, I agree. And I know that we're going to dive into each of these topic areas more, unfortunately. But just real briefly on this one, I'll say, same. My ancestors came from primarily European countries and from India. And we all have a background, at least all of us here on this podcast have a background of immigrants in our ancestry and getting here to the United States. And we can't do the work that we're doing now, without that history behind us, and we could dive into that history another time. It's really important, I think, in these conversations that we acknowledge that we're talking about people. We are talking about people who are not just constituents, not just residents of our districts, We're talking about our neighbors. We're talking about children. We're talking about your kids' best friends at school who are terrified and having these conversations at home about who's going to be taken away and when. These are real, actual conversations that are happening. The other conversations that are happening are in the local church communities of what's going to happen and when, and how can we protect our neighbors. And I want to make that really clear too, is that we heard a lot of messaging coming from faith-based values in the Trump administration. And I just can't stress enough that these are not values that are widely shared among Americans. Faith-based values have a variety, right? And Trump's version certainly is not reflective of the general population. We're talking about people, we're talking about our neighbors, and it's wrong.
If your values, whether religious, political, or otherwise, lead you to rip children from the arms of their parents potentially forever, you really need to think about those presuppositions that you're bringing to that. I mean, you were talking about being in community space. I mean, Brion has perfectly said, like, these are real people. I was at a community gathering last night where we were talking about finding people for the county to train to be crisis response foster parents, because the county is expecting an influx of children who don't have homes anymore because their parents potentially could get raided and taken away from their places of business or where they live, or even schools, even though that is technically against our laws currently written. So like, these are real things that are happening right now in our communities, both as a call to kind of shake some people out of their stupor, especially if they were Trump voters and were thinking of totally other things like the price of eggs, realizing this is the case. And also some people who feel powerless right now, that maybe momentarily, politically, there might not be a lot to change this federally, but like, there's a lot to do in communities. I was at a food bank today that has seen a humongous spike in, and that was before probably a rollback of SNAP benefits is going to happen later. So there's just a lot that you can do in your communities. If you need help knowing what that is, like, ask. People are very quick to tell you how you can help. Let's keep going because, Brion, like you said, we're going to have to talk about a lot of these and a lot of these issues more deeply, and specifically how it affects Minnesota's government and what we can do about it. Adjacent to this national emergency declaration at the southern border, Trump also signed an executive order attempting to end birthright citizenship, which is extremely outrageous.
Isn't that in our Constitution? I mean, it's sort of like he's just declared himself king and is writing things on paper. It's just a lot like the behavior we've seen with our colleagues in the Minnesota House is like, I decree. That's not actually the process, and you don't actually have jurisdiction over that.
Yeah, let me read. This is the Fifth Amendment to the United States Constitution, Section 1. All persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside.
Yeah,
there you go.
There's no reason to do this.
Just to be cruel.
No reason. Just to be cruel. That's it.
Cruelty is the point.
And again, historically, the 14th Amendment was passed during Reconstruction after the Civil War because there was an entire class of people that were continually not given rights. Those who had been forced from Africa onto our shores and lived in slavery were not considered citizens. It was built into our Constitution, actually, in the 3/5 Compromise. So 14th corrected that huge historic wrong. And it's still for the same reason we're trying to get rid of the 14th Amendment, because like, there's a whole class of people that we don't want to be considered full citizens. And it is chilling. Kristi just showed right there. Completely terrifying. So the theme of the day, I think, yesterday was authoritarian totalitarianism, which is a big fancy word. Authoritarianism means that there's one person through which all authority is measured in a political system. And totalitarianism is that a centralized government, it has control over everything. And now that Donald Trump, who is claiming authority over everything, is now the head of our federal government and is trying to be in control of everything, despite what state governments, local municipalities, counties, cities, municipals are doing. And it's across the board. Like he mentioned, we'll just start with birthright citizenship. Like, this is saying that I can change the Constitution without the normal mechanisms of power. That's under my authority to do, which it is not. By the Constitution, it is the state's authorities. Every time there's an amendment, it has to be ratified by the states or a convention. It's always been ratified by the states. That's how you do it. But he's saying, no, I can do that by myself. Also, he's taking over the Supreme Court's authority because the court is the one who's going to define if that constitutional amendment, like how it's defined in our laws. He's saying, no, I can do that unilaterally. Emergency declarations, what they're for is very small amounts of power that normally don't go to the president, being able to give into the president for quick responses to things. That's why it happens during natural disasters. But when he's using emergency powers for the southern border, what he's saying is, I don't want to go through Congress, who actually should have the power to change law and change how we do things in those levels and how funding is distributed. He's trying to circumvent that because he knows it's hard to work in Congress for this. So we haven't had things because the American people are pretty split on it. Same thing with tariffs. Like the ability to tax is housed in the Congress. That's a very important part of our system. But the loophole is tariffs, because they're normally around trade wars. We've allowed historically executives to take into account because they don't use them. So he's using that so that he can do those tax breaks to his residents. Like all of this is grasping and saying that complete power. And even in his speech, he claims divine power. I know you guys didn't watch it, but he says very clearly, he says, God saved me. And he's alluding to the assassination attempt that happened this summer. He says, God saved me so that I can make America great. And so he's claiming God's authority for what he is doing in this sort of savior-like role, which if you're not religious, you can roll your eyes at and say that's silly. But I come from the evangelical community that venerates him. They take that seriously, and that gives him immense power.
Yeah, and I think it's worth noting, too, that when he says things like that, we need to amplify that he doesn't mean it. He's saying it because he knows people will hear it and take it to heart. He doesn't believe it.
He believes in the power it will give him, though, right? Like that's what he believes and knows.
Right.
All right. So he also declared other national emergencies. He declared a national environment and energy emergency, which, as he says, means drill, baby, drill. In actuality, means is going to take away protections for a lot of our natural environment. In Minnesota, that's very specifically aimed at the boundary waters, which Trump can almost unilaterally repeal our protections for so that groups can start exploiting that area for natural resources. He also withdrew from the Paris Climate Accords for the same reason. How do you think our environment's going to do under this new regime, Brion?
Our environment doesn't belong to anybody. We are all using the resources that are provided to us by our planet that we live on. And it's just astounding to me that someone would come in with this business perspective that, we can get money out of this. We don't care that it's a resource that we survive on and that folks need to thrive. The implications of this over time, of Trump's actions over time, are devastating, not just for our environment, but when we look at how we distribute resources, not just here in Minnesota, but across the country. What Trump is saying with this executive order is essentially, I don't care about what kind of chemicals are in anything. I don't care how any of these business transactions and I don't care how these business transactions are going to affect the health of Americans, and how somebody can have that sort of policy standpoint. I will never understand.
And these things are irreversible. So it's like once, the glaciers have retreated so much, which has already happened due to climate change. It's not like we can just, whoopsies, we'll go and bring that back. Or the migratory grounds for the caribou, when those don't exist, the caribou are just gone. None of this is like, we can get a redo. This is all just setting the course, and not just for our country. It's for the planet.
Also, speaking of withdrawing from stuff, we withdrew from the World Health Organization, which we just had a, global pandemic where the WHO was extremely helpful and offered much clearer guidelines than Trump did when he was in charge of all of this. And this is obviously clearly just pandering to a part of his base that is upset about particular vaccine mandates, which I don't even want to get into that, but this is such a bad overreaction to the global health when there are so many potential problems on our horizon. It is irresponsible.
And imminently, as Andy Smith here is about to find out, as hopefully co-vice chair of the...
Are we talking bird flu?
We're talking the high pathogen avian influenza.
Yeah.
And we have seen that show up. It's called bird flu because when it hits birds, it absolutely decimates flocks. It's now in bovine, it's in cows, it's in cow's milk, it's jumped to humans. And
I think
so
we had our first human fatality in the U.S. 2 weeks ago, if I remember correctly.
Great time to step away from the WHO. Just like the short-sightedness, I think, just really show a lot of these just show the hubris of, you know, the emperor's new clothes, and like the emperor just, you know, gets tricked into thinking that he can control all the things. And like, we saw how that went. He was our president when COVID happened. And just because he says a thing, he thinks it makes it so, which is not true. And it's truly terrifying, especially in the realms of health and public health. Climate change is exacerbating those things too. And it's all connected, but this is like the exact opposite of the kind of leadership we need in this historic moment.
And talking about health and not living in real reality, let's talk about what he did around gender, which is an executive order saying in all under federal law and forms, and as much as the federal government is able to have policy, that there are, this is his quote, only two sexes. It's gender fundamentalism, which we know is not true, but is now going to be the official policy of the federal government. Brion, you're the chair of the Queer Caucus. I'm gonna shoot it to you to say how tragic and awful this is.
Yeah. You know, it is tragic. This is something with implications that are far beyond opinions of what people think of other people. This executive order from Trump, first of all, it's scientifically, factually, and all of the other ways inaccurate. Trans people have existed always. We know that Two-spirit individuals have been recognized in Indigenous community. There are folks who are intersex. Gender and sex are spectrums. And to say that there is just one or another, it's just factually inaccurate. I will say, as far as the social effect of this and how this is unfolding across the queer community and the trans community, this is where I want to tell people to take care of yourselves. The government, whoever's in charge, does not get to tell us who we are, what our values are, and whether or not we can live our lives to the fullest and with joy. And attempts to reclassify people or eliminate entire classes of people or groups of people, that is all part of a larger system meant to suppress. It's simply meant to suppress. There is no valid reason for this executive order to exist other than to suppress people. And part of that suppression is depression. So one thing that folks can remain in control of is living life with joy, because the administration that Trump has specifically expects the trans community to hide, to be quiet, to be depressed, and give up the will to fight against this. And that is something that is within our power. They cannot take that away from us. So as much as Trump wants to say certain people don't exist, or we are going to call you something that you're not, go right ahead, sir. But you will not take my happiness. You will not take my existence. I will resist, and I will do it peacefully and as respectfully as I can while you continue to tell us we're not human beings. And so I want to really, really stress to folks that this is extremely disappointing. This is extremely harmful and hurtful. This is discrimination, and we can't live in the space of being depressed. We have to take this and, in the face of adversity, say, we are here, we have always been here, and you are not going to take our joy away from us. We just cannot let that happen. Otherwise, we shut down, we lose our relationships with each other, and they've won.
Yeah. Amen. Donald Trump does not get to define your worth or who you are or your joy, as you said, Brion. I know the three of us on this podcast are dedicated to doing everything we can to keep Minnesota a Minnesota where the trans community and all of those marginalized communities can not only come to, but thrive within.
Yeah, we are going to do everything, every single thing in the state of Minnesota within our power to protect the people of Minnesota. And when we protect the trans community, we protect everybody. And that's a connection that we cannot lose either. Liberation for, a small group of people being attacked is liberation for everybody. And at the root
Liberation
of
only goes two ways.
the root of all of this is freedom and liberation. And what Donald Trump signed flies in the face of American freedom and liberation.
And to underscore the point, shout out to, I think it's Pro-Choice Minnesota was the group that put this out. Within the executive order that said this, speaking of gender essentialism and bodily autonomy, it says specifically under this executive order, female, quote, means a person belonging at conception to the sex that produces the large reproductive cell. And then another section, male means a person belonging at conception to the sex that produces. So really what they're saying along with this is the gender essentialism that includes anti-choice legislation and coming after abortion care, coming after reproductive freedom, coming after birth control. It's all part of the same system, just to underscore when they come for one, they're coming for us all. Mm-hmm. Again, we're definitely going to talk more about that on a future issue as well. But to keep going on some other stuff that happened, maybe one more, and then I'll kind of just go very quickly after this. But I think another one we have to talk about is the complete withdrawal of any sort of diversity, equity, and inclusion movements in our federal governments, whether that is education-based stuff, whether that is actually in hiring for positions within federal authorities or departments, just completely getting rid of an active way that we make sure that people of color and historically marginalized people are able to have access to power. We're just getting rid of it.
Well, and I want to say just something that I thought of when Brion was speaking as well is it's not just important for us to have people of diverse backgrounds and different upbringings and different lived experiences, not to mention, culture and color of skin. And it's important to have trans people, but not just that, but that actually having trans people, having queer people, having a diversity of people in your community and in leadership is beneficial. And it's not just like, we're going to protect you. It's like, we're going to protect you so that you can thrive and you can live your most beautiful and authentic and joyful and wonderful self. And I come from a kind of ecology background and environment. And what we have seen time and time again is when we have a monoculture, that creates problems. Then you get
destroys the soil.
Absolutely. You get super bugs, you get the super weeds. It's not a great long-term strategy. Okay, it might be easier in the short term. We'll just use this one piece of machinery, to farm all of this. But diversity actually builds strength. And so this is another one of those like, oh, they just want to, make some people happy and we can just get a bunch of old white men in the room who are rich and decide what to do. Well, that's how things worked for a very long time. And that has worked well for that very slim set of people. And that group of people is getting even smaller because more and more people are struggling, are, of course, having to work for a living. And I think people will be surprised when they're actually left out. And so this is a short-term, owning the libs. And this is a long-term screwing ourselves because we're much richer and more interesting and, more diverse than just a bunch of old rich white dudes.
Yeah, and it's important to point out, the rich dudes who were present at the inauguration, none of them care if anyone, any voter, any resident, anyone here, they don't care if you're a Democrat or a Republican or anyone in between. They care about themselves, their wealth, and being untouchable. That is it. And they will literally throw anyone else under the bus to get what they want, and they being an increasingly smaller group of people, because like Kristi said, there is strength and diversity, and their plan is to weaken every single facet of our society so that they become quite literally small and mighty.
Yeah, a picture's worth 1,000 words. At the inauguration speech, Elon Musk, Mark Zuckerberg, Jeff Bezos actually sat closer to President Trump than members of the cabinet, like Marco Rubio, who's going to be Secretary of State, actually got confirmed, I think, today. So it's happening literally before our eyes. Speaking of Elon Musk, I'll just go through one of these executive orders quickly. It was establishing DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency, aka the way that Elon Musk and those other guys can get rich while cutting services for people who need them in our communities, like SNAP benefits and Medicaid and Medicare. We saved TikTok temporarily. So I guess one maybe good thing. He signed an executive order to change the name of Mount Denali in Alaska back to McKinley, which is like an affront on the indigenous community specifically. Not to mention, in his inauguration speech, he made a reference to manifest destiny, which has historically been used to wipe out the indigenous communities in our history, but he's reviving it now for the 21st century. And I think ending on, he pardoned just about all of the 1,600 January 6th insurrectionists, making it completely legal to anything in the courts or in our government goes against Donald Trump, just violently rise up. He's got your back. And by the way, that includes commuting the sentences for members of the Proud Boys and Oath Keepers for seditious activity, even outside of that one day, like actually planning this from the beginning. He commuted their sentences. So,
yeah, just a quick point there for anyone paying attention to this executive order. Yes, it's true that Donald Trump is saying it is fine if you want to commit violence, not only against public officials, but against our law enforcement officials. I don't know how else to say it than, again, Donald Trump does not care about the individual. He doesn't care about police officers. He doesn't care about nurses, teachers, anyone. He cares about being rich and powerful. And this executive order spells it out for everybody.
And it's people who did it in his name.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the cronyism. I didn't know, Andy, when you were bringing up Elon Musk, you were going to talk about the Nazi salute that I saw.
I honestly did not know how to fix it. If you haven't seen the video of Elon Musk in the celebratory speech that he gives, literally gives a Nazi salute. He does it twice in the space of about 10 seconds. And honestly, I think if you haven't seen it, just Google it and go watch it. Because I think in the age we're living in, you hear that and you're going to think that's probably overblown, or they are describing it in an unfair way or whatever else. Just watch. I encourage you.
I think it's being under described.
Watch the video. It's not a natural movement that you make unless you're making a reference to Nazism and your allegiance to it.
That was the day one of Trump presidency.
Day one, there's going to be a lot of time, as we've all said, check after your mental health, be involved in community with each other, like talk with the people around you, but also support one another, play a board game, watch a movie. Don't check out, because that's also what we can't do. But there's a middle ground where you can take care of yourself and also take care of your community. Please do that. Kristi will talk about naps all day.
Take a nap, listen to music, walk your dog, and then get back at it.
Yeah, for sure. I think for now, we're going to leave it there. What we are going to do now is take a quick break, and then we're going to come back, talk a little bit about what's happening in the Minnesota House, because that coup is still ongoing, and we will go from there. So, quick break. All right, everybody, welcome back. We have talked about the terrible inauguration day and some of the executive orders, but we want to focus back on what is happening here at home in Minnesota. The Republican coup in the Minnesota House of Representatives is still ongoing, I guess, kind of. Kristi, can you talk to us about what happened on Monday?
Well, so we talked about how Monday was the inauguration of Donald Trump and Martin Luther King Jr. Day. So the House of Representatives, we have this rule where we have to meet in floor session every 3 days. So the 2 years that Andy and Brion and I have been in the House, we convene on the House floor on Mondays and Thursdays. You can waive that, but there's, again, more parliamentary procedure. So the House has to waive it and the Senate has to waive it, and this has to all be understood. Well, that didn't happen for a number of reasons, potentially because the House is not duly organized, but also they don't know what the hell they're doing.
So to waive that, this is parliamentary, but I think important, we have to have a declaration from both houses of the legislature to make sure that we don't have to meet every 3 days. But the Senate is not recognizing the House, rightly, which, by the way, it's split right now, 33-33, Democrats, Republicans, but they have not recognized the House. So there is not that joint declaration, which means that if they wanted to keep up this sham, they had to meet on that day. I think that's important to say. The Senate, which is also half Republican, is also not recognizing this fake sham House.
So they went to all the effort to pretend that they're legit and to pretend to have a floor session on Monday. And not only were, 67 Democrats not showing up because we will not be party to a coup, but in fact, 65 of their members did not show up. And so what that means is 2 of their members showed up. They made all of the chief clerk staff come to work on a holiday. They made all the sergeant at arms, all of the staff that helps us to do our job did not get a holiday due to their incompetence and or I don't know what else. Just feels mean-spirited. And so in order to continue the sham government that is happening, Lisa Damath went up to the dais. She gavelled in. She took the roll. There were 2 little green lights up on the board for she and Harry Niska. She declared everyone else who wasn't there excused after declaring no quorum, which was kind of amazing to have those words escape her lips. So she doesn't think that 2 people can do the work of a 134-member body. There's quite the visual of that empty chamber on both sides, except for little Harry Niska sitting right up at the front. And just the cruelty and stupidity of making folks come in and work on the holiday.
And let's be honest, like, the reason we're not there is because on principle, we think this is unconstitutional. It is wrong. It is against our democratic system. And like, they're trying to say, get to work. Why aren't you being there? When they, at least their public position, is that this is a legitimate meeting of the Minnesota House of Representatives, but they just don't show up because they want a 3-day weekend in the midst of this legislative coup. It is beyond irresponsible. It is a slap in the face to Minnesotans everywhere, and specifically the Minnesotans they forced to come out on a holiday when they don't even deign to show up to keep up with this sham session. It is infuriating.
Infuriating and should be embarrassing, frankly. And so that was Monday in the House. Tuesday morning at 9 a.m., the Republicans had to have their rebuttal papers filed with the Supreme Court for why they are defending their position that they think 67. And there were 39 pages submitted, and it reads a lot like propaganda. None of us are lawyers, but then tomorrow morning, the Democrats will be able to submit papers kind of like refuting what their points were today. Oral arguments will happen in the Minnesota Supreme Court Thursday. Is it Thursday at noon or Thursday at 1?
Thursday at 1.
Yeah, afternoon.
So then there will be discussion, and we'll get some insight on what the justices are thinking about this situation, and hopefully get a ruling soon about if, we're shirking our responsibilities and not going to the Capitol, or if we're actually doing the right thing and preventing this illegal power grab, and it's Republicans who are illegally trying to run the House of Representatives.
So we're currently planning maybe on doing another sort of like emergency episode this weekend, depending on that court case. We don't know how far reaching it'll be or what even the decision will be. It might be that maybe we can wait until our regular time next week. But just so you all know, as podcast followers, first of all, thank you very much. Second of all, please rate and review us and tell other people about us. But also 3, we'll be giving you as much up-to-date stuff as we can about what is happening. It might be like a quick 10-minute episode. We just don't know. But Thursday is going to be the oral arguments. We expect there to be a decision hopefully by the end of the week, like Friday. We don't know. We're hopeful.
On their own time.
Correct. But we just wanted to let you all know what we are planning from a podcast standpoint. Another thing that we wanted to do is we actually, before all of this fake coup in Minnesota stuff happened, we had actually recorded an episode, our first episode back. It's going to drop on the 15th, and it was just going to be about the election, what we thought of particularly Donald Trump winning the presidency. Now, the longer we've had to wait to not release that episode, it's less relevant, but we wanted to get you some of our insights on that. So what you're going to hear in this third block is most of that episode. We've edited it down, so it's not a full episode, but so you can get some of our reflections on the actual election itself. And we thought this would be a good complement to the first part of this episode where we talked about inauguration and all the horrible things that Donald Trump being president now presents us with.
No,
I hope we had good insight. I don't even remember us 2 weeks younger than we are now, what we even had to talk about.
Just keep in mind, like y'all have said, this is a couple weeks old and some things have happened, but we want to make sure that you're getting our thoughts.
All right. Well, enjoy, and hopefully we'll talk to you again soon. And that's what an election really is picking the people you trust. And I think with that transition, let's talk about election 2024. So I think I'm not breaking ground and saying the three of us are not happy with the outcome of the 2024 election. Let's just do like nuts and bolts, and then we'll dive into maybe why, what we learned from it. I mean, the obvious overarching thing is Donald Trump was reelected for a second, or elected again. I guess it's not a technical reelection since he, had the Biden presidency in between, but he is going to be the next president of the United States, beating Kamala Harris. I was going to put a adjective on there, but I'm curious to hear kind of your guys' perception, because there's a dialogue of whether this was a large victory, a squeaked out victory by Trump that just like worked out, how we should think about that victory. So let's just start off there. Kristi, you've been quiet for a little while, so I'm going to pick on you. What are your thoughts on the presidential outcome of 2024?
Yes, well, I think that's an important distinction to make, because I think when I think of the 2024 election, sure, I will think about Kamala Harris and Tim Walz not making it over the line, and for the first time, our country electing a convicted felon to the highest office in the land, the Supreme Court basically giving him carte blanche to do whatever he wants to do. And these are certainly unprecedented times, and I'm not real thrilled about that. I want to make the distinction that the results of the 2024 election nationally are not what we wanted. But for example, my community, my District 58A, I live in Northfield, and it was kind of a wonderful election locally. So there were some Moms for Liberty school board candidates who did not win election on our school board. What
is Moms for Liberty, real quick? Kristi,
MAGA,
who don't know.
I mean, yeah. So folks who aren't actually interested in funding our schools or educating our kids. So in Northfield, we were able to not elect those two candidates. And then also, what's a really big deal here is that we had a high school improvement referendum that failed in 2018 and then was really quite retooled. But then there were 3 questions on the ballot, including paying that upfront cost for geothermal heat for the new and improved school. And all 3 questions passed. So I just think that is a huge, huge win for our community, for the future of, our kids. We're having teachers right now teaching in a building that they have to leave their coats on because it is so ill insulated and ill prepared for our climate. It's a California layout of a building, which I don't know why they did that 50 years ago, but they did. So our high school needs some TLC, and it seems like, the community really came out in support of that. Also, the mayor that we elected here is being really proactive, trying to sort of safeguard against things that might be coming with the Trump presidency. So, and of course, the 3 of us all got elected on this call. So certainly, I think there are a lot of wonderful things that happened in the 2024 election. However, I think when we look at nationally and we look at the mood, taking the vibe nationally, that is certainly some cause for concern. So I, didn't want to have a hot take, and now it's been a month since the election. And I think some of the most useful takes, I'm looking at my notes here. So Asted Herndon, who wrote for the New York Times, and then I heard him has a great
Has a
podcast.
great
And he was
podcast.
on Code Switch, the NPR podcast. And he talked about kind of his take, which they call the little r racist idea that swung the election. And it is more about what Democrats are or aren't doing and how we think of voting blocks as this monolith. We think of the Latino vote as being a monolith. We think of the Black vote as being a monolith. We think of the folks that we don't think of as being a monolith is white people. I mean, we're starting to then parse out, college educated white people or working class white people, etc. But I think the thing that, as now the last rural Democrat in the Minnesota House of Representatives, is that we don't do a great job of meeting people where they're at or looking at the nuances of different communities of people. I especially am thinking about this as rural people. We're kind of just blanket, sort of the way we talk about rural communities is like, oh, they're a lost cause. They're all MAGA. And just anytime we are painting groups of people with a broad brush, it's not great. I think it's not great for our democracy. I think it's definitely not great for the way that we're seeing people so siloed, and not just siloed, but the term is calcified. So we've been siloed where, people are only consuming certain types of media and whatever. And what we're seeing more and more is that there's less movement in those different silos, is that we're becoming calcified. And so I don't see this as a landslide victory, because this is the first Republican who's actually won the popular vote in decades. I don't see this as a big landslide. I see this as, it's just these, because of the Electoral College being the way it is, it's just, eking out a win in these certain communities. And we are still so divided. We are still almost, 50-50. That's true in Minnesota. That's true in the national level. And it's not just like, oh, certain people are a lost cause. That's on us to go and meet people where they are at. I went to the Hmong New Year celebration about a month ago as well, with a handful of our colleagues. And do you know who was there? The chair of the Minnesota Republican Party. Do you know who wasn't there? Our chair. And, we could have had a lot more members show up. And not just in that space, but in, communities like mine and in townships. I knock doors, and even if people aren't going to vote for me, they are grateful that I showed up, because they haven't had anyone of any political party knock their door ever, because they're in a very sparsely populated township. And it's like, people just want to know that we give a shit. And whatever kind of, we can't just rely on these identity politics. We actually need to show up. We need to shut up and listen to the people. And I wasn't intending to wear this shirt today. But I mean, I think the most important word on my Listen to Black Women sweatshirt is the word listen. And it's not just listening to Black women. It's listening to every single person and making them feel that somebody cares about them at all. And so, I guess some of the hot takes about, oh, a Black woman could never win, or I think it's our party who really did not put, Kamala Harris had 3 months to, and a lot of people didn't even know who she was. They certainly didn't know what she's been doing the last 4 years as vice president. And when it comes to a time where people are feeling economically insecure, they're feeling socially insecure, they're feeling all of the different things, it's like people just wanted change. And she was unable in that time to really articulate how she's different than Joe Biden. And I'm a huge fan of Joe Biden. He ended up enacting some of our most progressive policies ever, but in a time where the entire globe is shifting is shifting to, these oligarchs and authoritarianisms. People are looking for change. People were looking for, like Bernie Sanders says at the beginning of our show, real change. And if we are unable to do that, if our party is viewed as just as in the pocket of corporations and billionaires as the other guys, then it's well, at least we could have the people who haven't, been sitting in Washington for 4 years. So I really see, and it's taken me a long time to really get to the point where I feel really strongly now. You know, it was immediately after the election, it was just heartbreak and confusion. And I think if ever people are suggesting from within inside our party that we need to abandon trans people, we need to abandon, the people who are the most at risk, I call bullshit. It's just that everyone needs to know we have their back, and it's not just people of color and trans people. It's also rural people. It's also working class people. It's also people who are scared about the climate crisis. I mean, there's so many different people that we can do a better job of speaking to without sacrificing the people most at risk. And so I just, happen to believe that what is the most popular is also like that can work everywhere. It can work in my rural seat, is like just actually caring about people and getting back to our roots of, we are the Democratic Farm and Labor Party. And we there used to be a farmer party. There used to be a labor party. And then the farmer and labor combined and we had a governor. I mean, it's like, yes, let's get back to our roots of working people and making sure all people feel seen and reflected in our policies and as well as in, the policymakers. So that's sort of like, that is what I have come to at the conclusion of the 2024 election. It's not like, whoa, we need to regroup and we can't ever have a person of color again. Absolutely not. It is like, we need to give our full-throated support and we need to have a process that is transparent and people feel like we're listening.
So can I ask you, because that was a lot. Thank you for sharing that. To connect some of these dots for me. Specifically, so you mentioned Seth Hurston's thought of like the little r racist that Democrats thinking about too much about demographics, or can you kind of flesh out that point for me a little bit more, because I was sort of unclear about how that connected to
I think
some of your other points.
Maybe we can link to that in the show notes, that podcast, because I will not be able to do justice for sure. But I think there has been this idea of I forget what the terminology is, but it's like demographic destiny, maybe that's it, where it's sort of like, well, the country is like going to turn more brown, and so of course it'll just like,
Hispanics generally vote more blue. Yes. There's more Hispanics moving to Texas, so Texas is in the long run going to be blue. We've been hearing that since the 2000
and like,
election.
that will just sort of take care of itself, and like, we don't need to actually like show up and pay attention to what those certain demographics, again, that we're making really, really broad generalizations about. And especially, like the Latino vote is like, my friends who are from El Salvador are like, how the hell does my experience, how does that relate to, Mexican Americans' experience or like first generation Americans versus the immigrants themselves. And so I think for me, the point of that is like not pointing the finger at like, well, Donald Trump did this and he's an anomaly. It's like, no. That finger is pointing back at us and what we need to do as far as just like actually getting back to capital T, capital P, the people. And if we want to actually be representative of those people, we can't just smooth out, different races or decide that it's those demographics that are the destiny. And that works both ways. That cuts both ways. That's looking at, more of the black and brown vote. And that's looking at a place like rural Minnesota and just deciding, oh, those are small town hicks. They're all white people. We're never going to get those people. Like, that is hurting us both ways in my estimation of, looking at the 2024 election and where we are today.
Yeah. And I think too, just to jump in here a little bit, what I hear a lot in my community, and I'm sure a lot of folks hear this too, is the way that politics has worked for a long time. American politics anyway, is that there's this two-party system, and most people feel like they're somewhere in the middle and have a really hard time deciding which of their values takes precedent that pushes them toward one candidate or one party over another. And I think, to your point, Kristi, when political parties are strategizing to try to, get out as many voters for that candidate or for that party. Those are some strategies of old, and I think they proved not to work. I think, it's a combination of many things. I know a lot of us here in Minnesota felt like the presidential election was an upset, and sort of had, did not feel at all that Donald Trump had any chance of winning. And I think that just shows a few things. One, it shows how siloed we are here in Minnesota as a state who's voted blue for so long, and still continued to vote blue on the national level. And so I think too, we need to do a better job of just looking at ourselves where we fit globally, and making sure that we're not, like you said, putting people in boxes that we assume this entire box is going to go and vote for a certain person. Because at the end of the day, absolutely right, capital T, capital P, the people, that's who we represent. And yes, a lot of our, as the new Libs, we have a lot of the same values and opinions, and that turns into agreeing on policy for the most part. But when we're not giving, when we're not paying attention to the uniqueness of each individual who is casting their sacred vote, we're losing people. And, it's comes back to what we were talking about earlier, is that honesty, right? And I think Democrats do a really great job of talking about policy and talking about how government works, and how things sort of, talking about the outcome, but not really getting into how this helps you as a resident of Northfield, or you, Andy, as a resident of Rochester, or for me as a resident of White Bear Lake. Like, how do these policies affect our neighbors, who are primarily, all of us are working class folks, right? And so I think as a whole, Democrats can do a better job of relaying the message of, like, yes, these policies are great, but let's talk more about why, and let's talk about how these policies affect people's day-to-day lives. Because the reality is, Democrats are not the folks who are drafting bills for corporate tax cuts. Those come from the Republican Party. Democrats are not people who are trying to strip away benefits, medical care. Those are Republican policy points. And, these affect people regardless of your party. These decisions are affecting everybody. So I think we do a better job of that. And I will say too, you had mentioned the trans community, and Donald Trump really, spent a lot of money campaigning against trans people, which he wasn't, we'll have probably a whole episode about that, right? But to attack a tiny portion of the community that, if you were to ask an average conservative in your district, at least I know conservatives in my district, for the most part, are like, I don't give a shit if you're gay, if you're trans, if you're Black, Latino, white. I want to know that you're going to go and do good work for me and ensure that my family has everything we need to thrive and, be successful and be healthy. Those are the things we need to talk about. And we see those tactics that are used at the national level. I don't know that was necessarily effective, because I think most people who are conservative are just, not playing these identity politics as much as we might see or hear about from the Democratic Party.
Yeah, and that ad that you're saying specifically, the anti-trans ad that probably we all saw on Sundays during football, that's when I saw it the most, during Vikings games. It was absolutely anti-trans, but I think the kicker of that ad, that when we look back on it, what we remember as being effective is not necessarily the content of being anti-trans, because I do agree with you. I think if we're able to have those conversations, people are more accepting than maybe not that there isn't danger, but that if we're able to talk with people, that's something that we can talk around. But the final statement, I think, is Kamala Harris is for they, them. Donald Trump is for you. And I think whether that's in talking about LGBTQ plus issues or immigration issues, or even like societal wise or economic wise issues, I think people really did buy that. I think that's wrong, right?
Yeah.
But I think the vote was that Donald Trump's going to try to help you. Kamala Harris is going to try to help other people. I'm fill in the blank.
Others.
Whatever that others is for people.
Mhm.
And not to necessarily label that right or wrong, because in voting, people just vote. But is it others? Is it the trans community? Is it others? Is it the immigration? Is it elites? Is it city dwellers? Kristi, there's all of these others that are piling on there. And I would say also, getting back to something that both of you mentioned, is I think that argument is a lot harder to make if the Democratic Party was scoring huge wins for the working class. And we've had some wins for the working class, but I think overall, either we haven't been good about talking about them, or we honestly have been a little afraid to go really far in a lot of these things. And part of that is who we have chosen to be our leaders. And part of it is the deck is stacked against us because the other party wins if government runs poorly. And all they have to do is gum up the works, and it proves their point, and it gives them power. So this deck is stacked against us. Electorally is also stacked against us. So that also helps. But I think people are not feeling the wins. It would be a lot harder for farmers to buy into the anti-trans ads or whatever it happens to be that is affecting them if the Democratic Party was making it, really easy for independent farmers to succeed. And we're really supporting them so that they could do more crop rotation, or making sure that the drinking water is very clean, or protecting them from factory farms, or whatever it happens to be. It would be a lot harder to make that argument, even if they disagreed and they didn't know a trans person and they were confused by that issue, but they knew that person voted for clean water or environmental protections, or to make sure that I can sell my product on the open market more effectively. I think that is where we have to focus, to be honest with ourselves as well, is that in this particular 2024, I do think Donald Trump was able to present himself as the candidate that was more for the people, including the global trend towards the right, including a global trend towards change. We saw in England, the Conservative Party struggled in the same way that the more left party was able to oust them from power because they were saying change and everyone wanted change. So there's all of that as well that we need to talk about. But I do think when we're reflecting, I don't think we need to reflect necessarily on policy changes as much as focusing on where we can win that will most affect people in ways that they can understand or that they can grasp, or that actually affects their lives. Things that I think we did well is the trifecta, like paid family medical leave or paid sick leave, which started yesterday here in Minnesota.
And I think
will help
there
us going
are
forward.
a lot of the things that we did, haven't been enacted yet that really will improve people's lives. And if we're gonna not be in a community until 6 weeks before the election, and then we show up and we want people to support us or give us our votes, and then pack up and leave and not come back for 2 or even 4 years, what kind of trust does that engender? What kind of people feel like they know us and have intimacy? And so there's also this thing of actually showing up, not just when it's advantageous to us, but showing up when a community is flooding, like mine was in the spring, the second 500-year flood in the last decade, or maybe third. It's no. It's not just on our timetable. It is on the timetable of life, of people just living their lives and showing up in that way. And something like paid family medical leave, broadly popular. That's why every industrialized nation in the world has it, except for us. And just like Obamacare, it's once people have a thing, then they don't want to not have it again. But it's not just us doing it, but it's us talking about it and showing up for people in the places that they already are, to let them know that it's because we care about them, and it's not because our corporate overlords really love it, because let me tell you, they don't. But it's that, fighting for the little guy, continuing to show up, not just in an election.
And that's another reason, getting back to what we said before, that we're doing this podcast. to talk about that more, to be more open. Getting back to what we were talking about at the beginning of the podcast, like we cannot craft a single press release and expect that that is going to be the narrative that people hear or understand or know.
Right.
And obviously, we're not going to change the whole Democratic Party here on this podcast, but I think this is us trying to kind of getting to our names, like to be liberals that are in some ways new and fresh and trying to bring that to a party that right now doesn't have it, but I think it can definitely get there.
Yeah, I think too, we talk a lot about, or have been talking a lot about what it takes for a candidate or party to win an election. And, the goal is not to win, but the goal is to win and enact change. And I feel like, when the three of us among the rest of our colleagues, when we were elected in 23, we really seized that opportunity here in Minnesota. It wasn't just, okay, we won, so we're going to be in a place for 2 years where we can stop bad legislation from happening. There was this agreement among legislators that we had this 2-year period to make as much change for the good as possible for the neighbors who elected us to go to St. Paul and make those decisions. And I feel like our team did a damn good job of making sure that a lot of those priorities got checked off. And we haven't seen all of them enacted yet. We don't know the full benefits. We're not seeing the full benefits of the decisions that we had the chance to be able to make. And we'll see that roll out over the next few years. And I'm hopeful that we will continue to message and just be open and honest about the things that we passed and if it's working and if it's not, right? Because we have to be open about the fact that a lot of the work that we do, there are shortfalls, and it doesn't matter what party you are in. It's that unintended consequences, right? Or there was something that someone didn't think of, or something in our system has changed since a law was enacted or changed the last time. And so, our responsibility is to continue to respond to the needs of people and make adjustments to things that are on the books. Sometimes those adjustments are large and sometimes they're small. But I think regardless, one of the areas that I really like to work in, as you guys know, is human services. And a lot of those, breaking down barriers so people can get access to the services that they need. It's not controversial. It is not partisan. It is also not flashy and sexy. But what I love about it is you can make a tiny little difference in statute that makes a world of difference for an individual. And I think we can do a better job about talking about how these changes are actually affecting the day-to-day lives for the people that we represent. Because that's why we're here. That's why we want to win, is so we can get to work and improve lives. And when it comes to Donald Trump's, Kamala's for they, them, Donald Trump is for you. It really should be, candidates who are for us, and not pitting groups against one another like we've saw clearly in this last election cycle. And that message is divisive, but it worked. And that, that strategy where politicians start to blame people in society who are our neighbors and who are, as legislators, who are our own constituents, when we start to put people in boxes and then blame that box of people, we're blaming our own neighbors for the problems that government and our government structures have created over time. And to fix those, we put people with good values into government. And so I think we need to do a better job to, circling back to Kristi's point, is it does nobody any good to put anybody in boxes. And, the anti-trans ad from Trump proved that dividing people can work if people believe that the enemy is their neighbor. And our neighbors are not our enemies. They're just not. It doesn't matter. And if you ask the people in your neighborhood, again, nobody gives a shit for the most part if you're gay, if you're Black, if you're an immigrant, right? Like, people are just living their lives, want a good job, want to be able to provide for their family and have their kids get a good education. Nobody disagrees with those values.
Yeah, I was struggling. That's probably where I should have come in as the host and got to the next question. But I was digesting what you're saying, because there's like a yes and here that is very difficult. I think that's true, Brion, at the highest point that we want, but like those societal forces are real, right? Of like racism and that people are scared of other people in many ways, and how best to communicate that as politicians, in that they're not your enemy, but you can't just say that. We have to also live it with our policy and be out there communicating and having them trust us, like building trust. I think just people don't trust politicians, obviously.
Right.
Except for like the rare few. And weirdly, Donald Trump has become one of those to a lot of people where they just trust him. So if he says people are eating dogs and cats, they'll just be like, yeah, they're eating dogs and cats. And that plays into overall societal fears. And, for centuries, humans have been scared of the other. But I don't have a point. I'm just like struggling with it. It's hard to kind of be able to be in those places.
And that's the thing.
Absolutely.
It takes a lot more work. It takes investment. And people know, like, oh, you didn't, like, oh, now you want to come knock on my door? Oh, now you want to ask me for money? Well, where were you when I needed something? Where were you, when I called upon you, or when I was scared, or, had a family member deported or stuff like that? It's like, it's not winning just for winning's sake. It's like we've gamified everything, including politics. And it's not just like, who wins today or tomorrow or next year. It's like, I think conversations the three of us have been able to have in this format, which is why we're all excited to come back, is like the why. It's like, it's not just winning for winning's sake. Oh, to own the conservatives or whatever. It's like, no, that's not what we're here for anyway, the three of us. And people don't feel that necessarily. No. People feel like all of politics has just become a horse race. And instead of like, talking about our values and why it is that we're running and why we voluntarily, get paid for part-time for a full-time job, and, why we've decided to be public servants in this way. So I think all of that is related. All of these different things that we're talking about is related. And we have seen time and time again, and especially in 2024, divide and conquer works. We're going to see more of that tactic and behavior because it worked in a lot of places. And I think that's why I wanted to start with the wins from my community, because there were places it did not work. And those are places that we have been organizing for a decade in places like my district, to be able to have safeguards against that, where someone comes in and says, oh, be scared of these immigrants over here. And people know better. They're like, wait, you mean these neighbors who I am on a first name basis with, who our kids go to school together and we work at the same? No, nah. Like, I'm not going to believe that. And it takes that sustained effort and being very clear, from us on our insides, but also putting it on the outside, our why and who we work for.
And I just another point, like that works both ways. Again, going back to this like victory, there's so many stories coming out right now about people who had family, like sometimes spouses that are, not documented, but they voted for Trump because they believed in him. They believed in his message. And many people are like, he's not talking about me. He's talking about bad immigrants or bad actors or something. So like trust is such a major point of how people vote. And people trust what they see, what they hear. And again, going back to this, like why I think we need to be out there more, talking more, both in like door knocking, which is the more traditional way of doing it, also on social media, on video, on where we go, what shows or podcasts we talk about. We just have to constantly be assuming that people don't trust us and showing them why they should trust us, both in our words and our deeds. And that has to be a continual thing that we are pushing towards. And it is exhausting. Kristi, as you said, it's a lot of work, but that's I think the modern winning strategy. And again, not just to win, but
and
so
that
we
is
can actually
that
affect
is the
positive
work.
Change.
It's like, if it were easy, it would have been done already. But here we are. Like, and I think it's important, so it is worth the effort.
And I think I wanted to highlight too. I jotted some themes down here because I kind of stand in the middle of the 2024 presidential election. Like, generally, people I talk to are either they think this is the end of the United States, and it's the end of politics as we know it, and this is the end of the Democratic Party. It's a very extreme position, and I don't know what the future is going to hold. I'm not going to make predictions. There's going to be some real bad stuff that comes out of this. But like, we have to completely change the way we do things to the Democratic Party, whatever. Then there's like people on the other side who are like, it was barely a win. Like, he's the first president to get the popular vote in this century. Like, we're totally, just come back, keep cracking away. Mostly people who are very loyal to, the current party scheme. And I'm kind of like right in the middle of this. I think both of those extremes are bad ways of taking this, because it is concerning how well Donald Trump did as a convicted felon, as someone who has been proven time and time again to lie, as a person who, like, the media did portray, I think, accurately as like a fraudster. Now for like 8 years, people still trusted him over. I think Kamala, honestly, is kind of a stand-in for the whole Democratic Party, what we have been for the last, since Donald Trump was elected. That's concerning. Major cities and in major demographics that were with us before also were part of that. New York had a huge trend line right. Chicago, huge trend line right. Miami, a massive trend line right. So like, these are concerning things that like we have to like be open-eyed about. But at the same time, there are people who have like risen above this. We mentioned AOC and Trump. There's a bunch of mixed ticket voters, but like, even in Senate races statewide, in Nevada, where Trump won overall in the Electoral College, Jackie Rosen won a very tight election. In Michigan, Elisa Slotkin won as a senator in a state where Trump won the presidential election. Arizona, Ruben Gallego, Tammy Baldwin in Wisconsin. Like, there are people who are doing this. Tammy Baldwin's a great example, actually, that doesn't get enough play.
Because she's from the Midwest.
But since she's a border state,
don't sleep on the Midwest.
We should talk about it. Did an amazing job of that very, very quality. So, there are positives. And actually, again, this is a factor we don't talk about enough. We actually gained seats in the U.S. House of Representatives. We gained 2 seats. We, being the party of Democrats, like, got closer to a majority in the House. So, like, it is a mixed bag. Unfortunately, this mixed bag has, I still think, what's going to be a dangerous presidency in Trump. But there are things to look at that this isn't the end of politics as we know.
Let's hope the people can, keep fascism at bay, and we have to keep paying attention. And again, it's like, we can't fall asleep for 4 years and then come back. It's like, nope, this is an ongoing conversation.
Yeah, absolutely.
100%.
And we know, as both of you have said, and I think I've said too already, but there are a lot of very real fears of what will happen under a Trump presidency. And, I think the biggest fears are that what Donald Trump has said out loud, that he will make it happen. And, all of the, othering that happens in his communications, those are some of the biggest fears, is that one by one, those other groups are just going to get, checked off as a problem to be resolved. And again, we cannot look at people as problems. These problems are not created by neighbors, by the average American, or by the average Minnesotan. And we'll see how successful Donald Trump is in enacting his platform, or at least the concepts of a platform that he might have at some point. The best I think we can hope for is that we've seen a lot of disorganization in a Trump administration before. And when you're not organized and you can't keep your staff in place for very long, that certainly lengthens the timeline of your goals. Those keep getting pushed out. And I think at this point, that's something reliable that we can look forward to in a Trump presidency, is that he will not be able to keep the team together, because it's really does not seem to be much of a team there. And, once folks get into positions where they're supposed to effectively enact his policies, we see those people leave or get fired. And I think, that's part of what I'm banking on over the next 4 years, is Donald Trump's ability to be very unsuccessful in the actual execution of whatever his plans are. But it is scary because of how much he is emphasizing othering people and literally getting rid of human beings who are in our own neighborhoods, in our state, in our country. Human beings who are not the problem. And so, I wanted to take that moment to acknowledge the real fear. And in no way, I don't think any of us take that lightly. But again, I think also just recognizing what a shit show a Trump administration truly is. And that's what folks voted for, was something disorganized and hateful. And I can only hope that that sways voters to make different choices in the future. And hopefully folks really come to see Donald Trump for who most of us already see him as.
Thank you all for listening. Tell your friends and family, please subscribe. This is a whole lot of work for us, but we think it's worthwhile, but especially if people listen. So please tell people to listen. You've heard from the new Libs. Now you go out on the block.
Bye.
Bye.